Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to catch up with me on Twitter, you can find me at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast, and we have a Patreon. The show is always free, but if you want to support us on there, you can. That's at patreon.com/I Love That Movie. And I want to take a quick moment to thank my top patrons, and they are Chris Balga, Jeff Woodman, Phil Barker, and Michael Cross. Thank you guys so much for keeping the lights on. And if you do sign up, you get like a weekly rundown of just what I'm watching that week. So everything else that people ask me about what I'm viewing, that will be on the Patreon. But I have a returning guest today. I have a very familiar voice on the podcast. I've got Scott. Say hi, Scott.
Hi. I'm back, but it's Christmas.
It's
Come
Christmas.
on.
Yeah, it's like that weird in between, Christmas time. Almost upon the new year. In fact, the new year may have happened by the time you hear this, but it's the holidays. So Scott, if people have not heard your voice on the podcast before, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
Well, I'm Scott Mcclellan, and I am a co-founder and co-host of the DCSquadcast over at Squadcast Media, where we primarily talk about just DC Comics rated media, TV, movies, comics, we even did an episode recently about an audio drama that is on
Oh,
HBO Max. So
nice.
it's like, yes, the Batman, the audio adventures we did. So, and we do trailer reviews and movie reviews and all that kind of stuff. So if you're into DC Comics and, in all the different multimedia forms, then, check us out.
Yes. One of my favorite podcasts ever. So definitely check that out.
Oh,
So my guest always picks the movie. What movie did you choose to talk about today?
well, I had to pick this one because it actually, I've made a point about every time I come on your show, I got to do something different. I got to check a different box. And then this movie that we're talking about today checks 3 boxes.
Mm.
So it's a Christmas movie, it's a fantasy movie, and it's a movie that came out this year, which I've never done something that recent on the show
I know.
before.
I was
So
going to say that's kind of rare in general, but there have been a few episodes that have been current movies. So, yeah.
So we will be talking about the A24 release from David Lowery this year, The Green Knight, which coincidentally made it into my top 3 of 2021 movies this year.
That's understandable. This is a great film, and I'm very, very excited to talk about it. I do want to let my listeners know, if they haven't heard one of these episodes before, I don't do like a spoiler free and then a spoiler filled. We're just going to talk about the whole movie. So if you haven't seen it yet, I believe you can watch it right now on Netflix. So go.
Really?
I
Is it on
think
Netflix?
so. I might be
I'll tell you
lying.
I'll tell
Let
you
me look it
this
up.
though. Right now, last time I checked, it was $9.99 on iTunes,
Well, there you
and
go.
it's worth it's worth more than $10. I'll
Oh,
just go ahead and tell you that right
definitely,
now.
definitely. But go check that out and then come back and, join our discussion. But let me go ahead and give a really just brief synopsis, and then we'll kind of dive into some more fun stuff. So King Arthur's headstrong nephew embarks on a daring quest to confront the Green Knight, a mysterious giant who appears at Camelot. Risking his head, he sets off an epic adventure to prove himself before his family and the court.
That's fair.
Yeah, vague enough to not actually say everything that happened, but we will talk about everything that happened.
Oh my goodness. And boy, did things happen in this movie? Or
Yes.
did they?
Or did
Question
they?
mark.
Yeah, I'm excited to discuss that because I have some questions about this film. I've got a couple real fast facts I wanna throw out there. One is that the crossroads with the skeleton in the hanging cage is very similar to the imagery in the film Willow, where Val Kilmer's character was briefly caged, and this is the inspiration for this film's adaptation in part. The director, David Lowery, was creating a willow diorama in his backyard, I believe, and that's when he kind of thought about this film.
That is amazing.
I'm
I
like, I
did not
like how
know
he
that.
casually makes dioramas. I'm like, well, I want to see these actually.
I really do too. I
Yeah.
really do. But that is amazing. I love Willow. Well, wow. I love that movie. And that just makes me love this movie even more now. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I read that and I was like, I like that when you hear what the, inspiration was. And I think we'll probably talk more about different inspirations in the film, but I thought that was a good little nugget. Another thing I had written down is that in the film, the Green Knight arrives on Christmas Day, but in the original poem, he actually arrives on New Year's Eve.
That is correct. Yes, because I have read at least three different translations of the original
Really?
poem.
Okay.
Yes,
I
I
was going to ask you that. I felt like if anyone has done that, you would have.
oh yes, I've gone on a bit of an Amazon spree. This was a highly anticipated movie for me, going all the way back to when I first saw the first trailer in December of 2019. I actually saw it before I was seeing another A24 movie when I saw Uncut Gems. The
Oh,
trailer for
okay.
this movie played in front of that
Yeah,
movie.
that's right, but it was, like, delayed, right? Because, I mean, well, obviously, but
Well, no, and that's a really cool trivia fact that I
Oh,
have.
okay, go for it.
This movie was originally scheduled to come out in May of 2020.
Really? Okay.
Well, yes, it eventually, of course, came out July 30th, 2021.
Mhm.
Well, David Lowery was editing this film while also in the middle for pre-production for Peter Pan and Wendy for Disney.
Oh, I see.
And it was scheduled to premiere at South by Southwest. Well, he was like at this breakneck editing, like he was just editing it like a madman while also trying to do the pre-production. And then as he tells the story, there's this great conversation with him and Elijah Wood on the A24 podcast. And he
Oh.
tells the story of Tom Hanks gets COVID.
Ugh,
The
I
next day
forgot
they
about that.
cancel. Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, they were so
And
sick too, he and his wife were so sick, but they recovered, obviously.
obviously. And then the next day, South by Southwest gets canceled.
Gosh, that was like
And
I feel like that's when we were all like, "Oh my gosh, even that's getting canceled?" We're kinda like, "Maybe this is serious."
yeah, exactly. And he said that even if it had premiered on time at South by Southwest, the movie still wouldn't have been finished. He would have been showing an unfinished
Oh.
version at South by
Oh, so
Southwest.
it would've been a risk, really. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, he said, then you hear Fast and Furious and Bond get, delayed, and he was like, "The writing was on the wall." So,
Yeah.
because the film got delayed, he took about a month off because, pre-production basically shuts down for Peter Pan and Wendy.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to finish editing the film, at the breakneck speed that he was, and so he talked to A24 and he wanted to polish up some visual effects.
Hmm.
And because he had about a month of of stepping away from the movie and then coming back to it, he said, "You know what? Let me kind of look at this edit." And he said he unlocked reel one. And he went, "Okay then." And that sort of opened the Pandora's box and he completely re-edited the movie.
Wow. So we would have gotten a different film, I mean.
uh, we were getting a shorter film
Mm.
because he talked about how he felt like this arbitrary pressure to make the movie under 2 hours.
Where have we heard that before?
I know. And apparently he called it hate cutting. He was hate cutting the movie
Ugh.
to try for some arbitrary reason to make this movie under 2 hours. And it was going against his original intention of the film because David Lowery wrote the screenplay for this movie as well.
Mhm.
And apparently in his scripts, he describes how long shots are going to be
Mm.
in his scripts. And he was going against that because he was just under this pressure because he was trying to balance two movies at one time. His friends, after he did when he finished the new edit, said that the movie just meant more in this new edit, and he says it made about a 10-minute runtime difference.
Yeah, yeah, I was
So
gonna say it's only 2 hours and 10 minutes, but, you know, those 10 minutes are obviously pretty important.
yes, and I've got at least one scene that would have been completely cut, and we can talk about as we talk
Oh,
about the
cool,
film.
cool, yeah.
But that was just I just love the idea of he talked about, and I feel like we all have talked about during the pandemic, is like we've all found little silver linings that have happened. It's been this terrible, awful time, but there have been, like, if you step back, you can look at, well, this was a benefit, like this allowed this to happen.
For
and
sure.
and David Lowery talks about how having the time to breathe and take another look at this movie has allowed it to be the movie that we saw.
Wow.
So I would argue we actually have got to see a better version of the movie than we
Mhm.
would have if it stuck to schedule.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I mean, if everybody had the gift of time on their hands, right, and didn't have to be under such pressure, and I think you know you hit on something when you were talking about the 2 hour runtime. I mean, that's a heated kind of debate right now in film Twitter. You know, about how long should movies be? Do they need to be shorter nowadays? But there's been a lot of recent films that have really challenged that, thankfully, and
Thankfully.
so I'm obviously on the side of doing what is the director's vision and not shortening movies for the sake of runtime. So I support that.
I'm I'm a guy who only watches the extended edition of the Lord of the Rings films.
There you
So if
go.
that tells you anything.
That tells you something there. Yeah. So the last thing that I had was that the film avoids dating its setting. Its technology is a little too advanced for the time of the historical King Arthur, who probably lived in the 5th or 6th century, but it appears to be set in the 14th or 15th century when the definitive Arthurian works were written. So those works were kind of updated. They updated Arthur to the present day and have been copied by most succeeding pop culture works about Arthur.
Yes, but I also find it very interesting that this film has the iconography of the Arthurian legend,
Mm.
but never spells it out, even in the credits.
Ah.
Like, I'm not sure if anyone's ever bothered to look at the credits, but the characters who you would assume are Arthur and Guinevere are only called King and Queen. The character who you can pretty much just, slap across the face and say it's Merlin is only called Magician. Like,
Mm.
they don't even, like, even Gawain, Gawain, however you want to pronounce his name. The movie says Gawain. I tend to go with the pronunciation of Gawain, which is funny because it's still we're
It so
translating
sounds like
it.
Wayne.
I know, right?
But,
But even his mother, who is just called Mother, like Gawain is the only character from the actual Arthurian myth
mm,
that is named even in the credits. And I find that
interesting.
very interesting that Lowry was just like, you know what this is. I
Yeah.
don't Arthur hands him a sword. You know that's Excalibur, but we're not gonna say it. You just know it, and this film does so much of that sort of visual storytelling where it's like, I'm not gonna explain this to you. Either you know it or you know it, and just go with it.
Yeah, and I also feel that especially the trailers really felt like they were like, just to hear that, he's inspired by Willow, that's not that surprising because it really felt like even though the movie feels very modern, it also feels sort of like an homage to, like, 80s, 90s, and earlier, like, fantasy films, like, something that we don't do
Oh,
as often anymore that
oh
clearly
yeah,
David
those
Lowery
80s.
misses.
Oh, those 80s sword sorcery movies like Lady
Yeah.
Hawk and Willow and yeah, what else? I feel like, kind of like the last time I was on, we talked about The Last Starfighter,
Yeah,
and there was that sense of there was sort of an Arthur myth underlaid
that's
in
right.
that story, even though it was a science fiction story. But man, the 80s, Conan the Barbarian,
Yeah,
80s were like were the heyday of sword and sorcery
for
movies.
sure, yeah, and so it's really fun to see something that's an homage to that, but also kind of refreshingly new and different. I like David Lowery. I'm a big fan of the movie, A Ghost Story, which
I still need to see
oh,
that.
you should.
I
This movie kind of unfairly got maligned because of some, you know, difficult stuff that happened with Casey Affleck, not even necessarily related to the film, but it's like when the movie came out, a lot of his skeletons came out of the closet again, and they actually overshadowed the film. Like a lot of reviews during that time really kind of shit on the film. And it's really ridiculous because I think in the end, it only hurt David Lowery and it didn't actually hurt Casey Affleck at all. But it was almost like he was a convenient person to go, let's blame him, even though he wasn't really connected that much to the scandal.
Well, I bought A Ghost Story on
Okay, you
iTunes
should watch it.
as
And
soon this movie single-handedly made me go, David Lowery, I'm paying attention.
yeah, it's a
Like
really good
like
film. And, you know, I'm not gonna, again, like it was sort of the timing of when it came out. Pete's Dragon,
mhm.
I'm okay with. I think I'm a little bit too in love with the original Pete's Dragon. But definitely a ghost story I enjoy.
Well, that's fabulous. And like I said, listening to that conversation between him and Elijah Wood, I mean, I dig him as a person
Yeah,
just
he's
based
so
on
young and so new, you know, but it's like, yeah, I like his vision. Sorry, what were you gonna
yeah.
say?
No, it's
Sorry.
fine. He's only 2 years older than I am. So,
Yeah,
it's like I get you. I
yeah,
really get you.
exactly, like a contemporary, pretty much.
Oh, fun fact, something to look forward to actually. He revealed this in that conversation as well. If you go to watch Peter Pan and Wendy when it does eventually come out, the Green Knight's head will be attached to Captain Hook's ship.
Question: is this Peter and Wendy version? Is that the one where the focus is more on Wendy?
I honestly do not
Because I
know.
remember there was a trailer a while back, and it was almost like, I don't know, it was sort of making Peter seem like the bad guy.
To be honest, I remember seeing the poster for that movie. I
Yeah.
haven't seen the trailer
I don't know
for
if
it.
it might be called something else, or it might be called Wendy or something, but, you know, I was kinda like, "Well, that's messed up," but at the same time, that was an interesting twist. So,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
you can kinda
I feel
see a
like
world
this
where Peter taking Wendy away might be bad, so
might be bad. Yeah, exactly. I think this one he's back with Disney
Oh,
again.
okay,
I
okay.
don't think Disney would
Yeah, they
probably
won't let
that's
anything
something
happen to Peter because he's, you know, important.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
but now it's like, okay, now I'm going to be looking for the Green Knight's head, like
Yes.
just because that is so cool.
Yeah, yeah, that is really cool. Do you wanna talk a little bit about the cast?
Well, that is interesting because actually there's only about 4 members of the cast I'm actually that familiar with.
Okay, yep, go for it.
I mean, and by familiar as in Dev Patel.
Yeah, clearly.
Frankly, I'm only aware of him from Slumdog Millionaire. Like,
Yes.
and someone had to point that out to me.
Oh,
Like that
really?
was exactly, yeah. I
I
was
love
he
him
was so y
because he was in Skins too, which I also watched. That's I think I saw Slumdog Millionaire and then I watched Skins because of it.
I need I need to see Skins then because
He's really
I
young, like really young in that movie.
he really impressed me. Oh, and he was in Lion too,
Yeah,
because that
that's
was
true.
nominated for an Oscar. I just haven't seen these movies. That's the thing. But once again, anything and anyone attached to this movie is now like you're on my radar.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, he's I don't know, I guess because of Slumdog Millionaire, I just became like an Insta fan of his, and then when I saw he was cast in this, and because I've seen him also on Skins and a couple other places, I was like, "Oh, I really like him and I miss him." And so when he was cast in this, I was like, "This is a good choice." He's got this sort of, I don't know, like regal air to him, and I
mhm.
just think he's like a good fit for this character.
He's also just the acting he does in this movie is just incredible,
Yeah, it feels
and
very like Shakespearean. It's good.
very much so. And then, of course, the next one up for me, of course, would be Alicia Vikander,
I mean, how can we not
who,
mention her?
I mean,
She's awesome.
honestly, I will be honest, I only just saw Ex Machina this year.
Oh, I love that
Like,
movie.
it is
It's
so
so
good.
good.
Another A24 movie.
Yep.
I was so late to the game on that movie. It was embarrassing.
Well, the the
that
the trailer isn't really, I don't know, it doesn't really tell you a lot about it. I think you get a different movie when you watch it than what you're expecting.
And I never saw the trailer,
Oh,
so that was interesting. I mean, the what attracted me to Ex Machina was Alex Garland because I saw
Yes.
Annihilation, and
Annihilation
I
is
was like,
amazing.
"It is amazing." And so I was like, "Oh, and he did another movie? Another sci-fi movie?" And then I waited just long enough that I knew who Alicia Vikander was. I got a better acquainted with who Oscar Isaac was. I was like, "Oh, I am so there."
I loved her in Tomb Raider too. I'm sorry, but I will defend that
No,
movie.
I that was the first time I saw her was in Tomb Raider, and I enjoy that movie immensely. No lie.
Yeah.
I got to go to an advanced like fan screening before it was released to see that movie, and I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I really liked it. I understand the critiques some people have, and I even agree with some of them, but I think overall it was a good film. And I saw Ex Machina because Nick is such a fan of Alex Garland because of his work on Dread. And so I think he helped write that.
Yes.
And so whenever he became like a
Yes.
director, he was like, "Oh, we need to watch this because this is the guy that wrote." And it was just like, wow, we had no idea how much of a big fan we were going to be after that. So that's the only reason why I saw it early. I have to give the credit to Nick on that one.
Oh, okay, so who else? Joel Edgerton,
Of
because he
course, yeah.
plays
The Lord.
The Lord of the Manor. I He's just one of those guys. He's just one of those guys. Like he's like a solid character actor who just you sometimes you don't even know he's in the movie, but then he's in the movie and you're like, "Oh, him. Oh, I love
Yeah.
him."
I feel like him and like Sean Harris, they're the kind of people you call for this kind of a movie.
Yes,
For sure.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like because Sean Harris, honestly, for me, it was Mission Impossible. 'Cause-
Oh, yeah.
yeah, because because he first shows up in Rogue Nation,
Oh,
and then
that's true.
he pops back up in Fallout, and he was so good as like a Bond villain in Mission Impossible.
Yes.
But he's also been in other things. But he's also one of those those guys.
Yeah, yeah.
Like if you've seen some sort of British production, he's probably there
Mhm.
with 50 other people in the movie that you go, I know you, I've seen you in things.
Yes, yes, for sure.
But that's really kind of where I mean,
Well, Barry Keoghan, yeah.
Barry Keegan's in it, but I wasn't even that familiar with Barry Keegan. Barry Keegan's kind of popped up name wise after I saw this movie. So I'm in this weird place where it's like these people have had careers, but this movie was just the movie that made me go, I know who you are now. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
I think, it may have been Dunkirk was, like, the first movie that I really enjoyed Barry Keoghan in,
Yes.
and I thought his
Yes.
his you know, his role was very small, but it had a really big impact on the film. After that, I saw The Killing of a Sacred Deer, which I love that movie. I don't know if I enjoyed it. It's one of those movies where it's like, it's really I can't explain what's good about it. You just have to see it. But he's great in that movie. And I liked him in Eternals too. But I think I like him when he pops up. And he's got a small
Yeah.
role in this one, but the role that he does have, again, has his performance always adds something to every film that he's in.
"'Twere not enough. 'Twere not enough." Like, I love his line delivery is fabulous in
Yes.
this movie. Oh, yeah. No, so I know sometimes you like to ask if we just kinda wanna go through the movie, if we wanna hit, like, favorite scenes, but I feel like this movie, to truly understand it and digest it, you really kinda have to, like, walk through the movie.
Okay.
Like,
Go for it.
because this is a movie that I saw twice in theaters on opening weekend.
Wow.
Like,
Okay. That's
I
awesome.
went I went Friday night, because like I said, I was hotly anticipating this movie, and I saw the movie, and it's one of those movies that's like, "This is incredible. This is visually incredible. The cinematography is amazing. The music is transcendent." And then you get to the end of the movie, and you're like, "I still don't think I know exactly what happened in this movie."
Yeah, I think, I have that same feeling. But I also think it's open-ended. I think it's open to interpretation, and it's almost like
Very much so.
every time you see
Yes.
it, you might see it a little bit different, which is really fun.
Yeah, so prepping for this podcast, this is my third time watching it.
Nice.
And I'm still like, and I've read a few more translations of the poem. I've read some scholarly introductions that kind of fill me into like some context with the poem that makes me like every time I read a different version of the poem, I'm watching the movie differently. It's one of those movies that you go all in, like
Yeah.
you, and you ready. Like I am crying that there's not some sort of director's commentary out there. It's like I want it so badly because I was like, Lowry, talk to me.
I remember the second we saw it going home and looking up all those, like, what did it all mean? I love watching those kind of breakdowns on YouTube of, every Easter egg, every interpretation and stuff like that. So definitely watched a lot of that when I saw the film first.
Well, here's something that blew my mind when I heard David Lowery explain it. So that that opening scene, like before we even get to um, Gawain, where there's that house that's randomly on fire,
Oh yeah.
and then it's doing what I almost call like the A24 editing, where it's like image credits, different image that's slightly different. It's
Yeah,
almost
sort
like
of
those
reminds me
like
almost of like Midsommar or like, other films like that where they've kind of show you something really shocking and then you almost forget about it
yes.
until you see it again and you're like, "Oh yeah."
Well, if for anyone who maybe doesn't remember it, like there's this weird scene where you just basically see this house burning down, and then eventually, this guy brings this woman, puts her on a horse, draws a sword, and they kind of run off.
Mm,
And if you watch the credits, they're actually named Helen and Paris because the poem starts off talking about the fall of Troy and about
interesting.
how the Trojan War spread this and basically how it's the beginning of like all of our the poet talks about how it's basically the beginning of all like our stories and our heroes.
Mhm.
And so Lowry wanted to film a scene that had to be set in Camelot, but that would evoke, the idea of, oh, here's a guy who sets fire to a place and then runs off with the girl. And you
Mm.
actually hear the farmers yell, Helen, if you listen really carefully. And so that's supposed to be like Paris running off with Helen to Troy.
Oh,
That's what that
wow.
symbolically represents at the beginning of the movie because that's how the poem starts.
Yeah, I would have completely missed that, so thank you. And I need to read this poem, clearly.
You can read it in an afternoon.
Okay.
Um, and it's kind of funny because, you're watching it through the window of the whorehouse
Mhm.
and it pans down to Gawain sleeping. And Lowry said the idea was it's like it's like Gawain's having a dream because it's right
Oh.
there adjacent to him. So once again, he's visually trying to represent this is a dream of like of of heroes, men running off with the ladies and drawing their swords and going into battle, and that these would be the things that Gawain would be dreaming of.
Mhm.
Because unlike the actual poem and unlike the actual Arthurian myth, in this movie, Gawain's not a knight yet.
Yeah, he's kind of a degenerate.
I've kind of referred to him like the failure to launch knight.
Yeah, he's very yeah, all he's doing is getting drunk and sleeping around, and he doesn't have any focus yet.
And he still lives with his mom.
Yep. Yes, he does. And he's
And
non-committal to his girlfriend, because she's a sex worker and, that's gonna come up later as well, but yeah.
yes, it will. Which was funny because that was very intentional on David Lowery's part. The idea of this story is basically mom giving you the helpful nudge to get out of the house.
Yeah, push you out of the nest.
Exactly. Lowry said that he actually didn't leave home till he was 26. So he
Yeah,
had a
I can
mother who
relate to
gave
that.
him a very he had a mom who gave him a very helpful push out the door, and it definitely is baked into this movie. And I love that I like felt that when I watched the movie, and then to hear Lowry like confirm it, I was like, yes, it's like I'm smart. I can watch movies.
Yeah, and I feel like that's very relatable these days. I mean, the way that things are, people are leaving home later and later for a variety of reasons. And I think the movie kind of does a good job of echoing that because he and his mom aren't in the greatest of positions, right? I mean, they're not. I think that's part of his failure to launch is that he's not, his life isn't, in his mind, his life's not going to like end up the way that he hopes. It does end up doing that, but not without the big push from his mom and not without her sort of operating behind the scenes.
Yeah, exactly. Because, this is where the movie is different from the poem in that in the legend, Gawain's mom is more. Arthur has two half sisters in the
Mm.
original legend, Margals and Morgan Le Fay, and the entire adventure with the Green Knight in the poem is a plot by Morgan Le Fay. When Lowry decided to make this kind of a, leaving the nest type of story, he did what a lot of people do, and it's not the first time this has been done in any kind of Arthurian movie, is they just combine the two sisters into one.
Yeah.
So his mother becomes the witch or the sorceress, and so that allowed, instead of this being a really convoluted plot, which the poem makes it out to be, it becomes a little bit more personal in that it's a mom trying to teach her son a lesson.
Yeah, and I think also trying to improve his position in life because it feels like it's never explicitly said, but it doesn't seem like they're in the highest favor with the king in general. Like if this hadn't happened, I don't know if that he would have gotten noticed as much, right? So she's kind of, her motives are good for him, but still kind of murky, which I like.
Yeah, I also wonder if maybe this is where the interpretation comes in. I personally feel like the reason that his position isn't as high is because he hasn't kicked himself in the pants to like
Mm,
go out and like the reason he's not a knight is because he hasn't committed to being a knight.
yeah,
Like
that's true. Although sometimes I felt like he feels below the others for some reason other than that. But but again, that's like me sort of putting my own lens on it. So I don't know. I guess
Well,
you can
but
interpret
once
it so
again,
many
this
different
movie
ways.
allows for different lenses
Yeah.
because I mean he is the freaking nephew of the king. Like
Yeah. It's like, why is he
and
so
so
unmotivated? Yeah.
exactly. Well, and is it because he, you know, literally his mom is the king's sister.
Yeah.
If he doesn't have an heir, which obviously in this interpretation Arthur doesn't have an heir because man, they made Arthur and Guinevere really old in this movie.
Well, and ill. Like
Yes.
they're basically dying the entire movie, and it's sort of apparent in the beginning, but as the movie wears on, they're getting sicker and sicker and sicker. So you start to see why the king becomes so attached to Gowan.
Yeah, because he'd be the heir.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. I also liked how when it kind of does the title sequence in the movie when he's, you know, on his way basically to Christmas in Camelot, that the title Sir Gawain shows up in like all those different kind of fonts.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I don't know, like a thought I even had today was, is that kind of like because this poem has been translated so many different times because it's originally written in Middle English. Like this poem, it was originally written in the same form of English that the Canterbury Tales was written in.
Ugh,
So
those were tough. I took a Canterbury Tales class and I struggled.
you're right.
I didn't
And
know
that's
what
why
I
you
was
just
signing up for, and then when I got there, I was like, "Oh."
uh-oh, yeah. So that I mean that's why you've got to find a really good translation. And you can
Yeah.
find prose translations or you can find translations in verse so you're still reading it like a poem. But I don't know. I It was just a thought that occurred to me because I feel like once again this movie allows for you to kind of, look at it in different ways. I also think it's funny that the movie still calls it Sir Gawain even though he's not a sir. He's not a knight.
Oh,
A point
true.
that gets a point that gets made repeatedly throughout this movie
That's true.
that he's not a knight. He even has a line where he says when one of the sex workers says, "Aren't you a knight yet?" And he goes, "I still have time." Like I'm like, there's that failure to launch mentality right
Yeah,
there.
not getting any younger.
Nah. Um, really cool behind the scenes thing. So the shot in because I also love how this movie is divided up like into like chapters,
Yeah.
and you get those little title cards. So when we're in the Christmas game chapter, where we're basically at the round table having Christmas dinner, there's this wide shot when Arthur is like giving his speech to the knights. There's a matte. That's a matte painting.
Oh, yeah,
That
I did see this behind the scenes thing, like,
Yeah,
on YouTube.
Lowry's brother painted it
That's awesome.
because because as he was setting up the shot, he realized he couldn't get the shot as wide as he wanted. So he got his brother to paint a matte painting to make it wider.
Which again feels like an homage to older cinema.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a cool detail because I everything about this movie I love. I mean, the costumes are amazing. The set design is gorgeous. The sound design,
Yeah. I
like
love the way
when
the
the
Green Knight looks and sounds.
especially like when he moves his head and it just
Yes.
sounds like, cracking wood.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
it's
was, like,
so
not
amazing.
prepared to see him, and I think you kinda see him real quick in the trailers, but they do such a good job of making him, like I don't know how to put it, like, almost frightening. Like,
Yes.
he seems real. Like, I thought he looked so good.
Yeah, and so that was really really cool. And like I said, this is that scene where you're like, here's all this Arthurian iconography, but you better just know what it is
Yeah.
because we ain't going to explain anything to you. Like when Merlin shows up, I'm like, dude, that's Merlin. Because he basically just gets a scene. He just gets like a moment where he like shakes his head at Arthur when the Green Knight walks in. It's like, oh, okay, cool. That's Merlin. All right, gotcha.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
no dialogue, just old guy with a really long beard and some druid looking symbols tattooed under his eyes. Okay, cool.
I guess just
I got
maybe
you.
like an acknowledgement of magic exists and the maybe to set the tone for us to be like, "Oh, okay, they're surprised, but not too surprised because they're, like, aware magic is a thing."
Right. So I'm kind of curious. How did you interpret like when I'm going to just I mean Mother, when Mother and her three in the three sisters
Yeah.
basically are like I interpret they're casting the spell I guess to call upon the Green Knight. Like, how do you interpret that whole back and forth scene right there at Christmas dinner?
Again, it's where I'm not sure about her motives, like, I kind of thought to me, I thought she was trying to secure a place for her son, but also it's, like, an extremely dangerous way of doing it and sort of manipulative of the situation because and I don't know, and somewhat almost evil, I don't know, that's how I felt about it.
Right, because you get the sense that this is like black magic, like the
Yeah.
idea that she's a witch. Like we're not Merlin here. We're doing this the bad way.
Yeah, and it's like, when he shows up and the way that I guess, like, the presence he has and the way that people are sort of responding to him made me feel like, like this is a bad thing.
Hmm.
But
I'm also
predictably, she knows how her son's gonna respond to it. So I guess to her it was, like, worth the risk, but I don't know.
or did she or was she hoping for a different outcome? Like was
Mm,
she because I feel like the way I interpret this movie is that it is him being tested over and over again. Lowry has said that this is a deconstruction of the hero's journey.
mm.
Like it follows the idea of a quest, it follows the idea of the hero's journey, but our hero is repeatedly unheroic the entire
Yeah, he
time.
makes a lot of bad choices, starting with his very first one, which is, like, the dumbest thing he could have possibly done.
Well, it's because he wasn't listening.
Yeah.
It's like the Green Knight sets up the terms, and Arthur even says, "Remember, it's just a game." And what does he go and do? He goes and chops the dude's head off. It's like, you do
Yeah,
realize what's gonna
why would you
happen in
do
a year.
that?
I know, right? It's like, if you just nicked him, then in a year, all you would get is a nick. Like, these are the rules.
Yeah, I guess he
And
couldn't help but, like, want to impress everybody, and it was such an easy
yes.
kill, and it was so dishonorable, because, he literally, like, basically lends him his neck, and just everything about it is so cowardly, even though he's kind of seeing it as heroic.
Right, because he's there, he's holding Excalibur. It's like, he gets to slay the monster, but he does it in the worst way possible.
Yeah, it's
And
like
it
it's there's no honor in the way that he does it, so you're like, "Oh, that's bad. He's gonna kill you now." In a year.
yeah, in a year. And I feel like that, and I feel like this movie is set up like I try to interpret how much I think Mother is manipulating every situation that he encounters throughout this movie.
Okay, so
Like,
you feel like she's, like, testing him.
yes,
Okay.
that's how I interpret it. Because we get the next section, which is a 2 quick year. I love the Punch and Judy show, like the puppet thing. Like,
Yes.
what a great way to what a great way to symbolize passage of time because we got
Yeah,
to
and
go
it's got
through
that,
an
like, literal wheel of time, that kind of medieval concept.
yes,
Yeah.
I love it. This is actually where we get to the scene that would have been cut out, completely cut out in the original edit. The scene with Gawain and Isel by the river that would have been completely removed. Like he put
Oh,
that back
wow.
in with the new edit, and I couldn't imagine this film not having that scene.
Yeah, I agree. Huh, that's interesting.
Uh, so then he's leaving. We get to the journey out section. He's riding away from Camelot. I love how long that shot lingers of him just riding away from Camelot.
Mhm.
You know, and this whole thing was shot in Ireland, so this is like some great Irish, landscape
Yeah,
you get
it
to
all
look
looks
at.
like that already, so
Oh, uh, I love it when he has the bell that he gets because I'm sorry, I did think of Polar Express.
The bell. Yes.
So I was like, "Oh, there's such a meta connection here with I love that movie." Just, uh, and you already talked about the Crossroads, which I love that story. It means so much more. And then this is also where we get introduced to the fox.
Yes, which okay, what was your interpretation of this fox? Like, we were trying to decide watching it, like, is this his mother in fox form, or is it just a familiar, in a lot of medieval stories or, like, in D&D or something, fantasy stuff, there's usually, like, a little animal friend. How do you interpret this fox?
This time around, I interpreted it as his mother.
Yeah, because
Like,
I just felt like the fox kept trying to be like, "Do this instead," and he was like, "Nope. I'm gonna do the dumbest thing."
yeah, really. Now, I read in one of my and I got so harried trying to get ready for recording that there is actually in medieval literature the fox represents something on its own. Be-
Oh.
because later on when we get to the Lord's Manor, there's supposed to be three animals that he kills when he goes hunting. It's like a stag, a boar, and a fox. And
Mm.
in medieval literature, all three of those animals actually have like they were symbolic of something back in the
Okay,
day.
okay. That makes sense. I do feel like you see a lot of foxes in
Hmm.
medieval stuff,
But
yeah.
but this time around, I really felt like the fox was his mother.
Yeah,
I
that's
really
that's how I
did.
interpreted it too.
So, and when we get to the section of a kindness when Barry Keoghan shows up, this is where you start to see the motifs that repeat itself of how Gawain keeps on screwing up because
Yeah.
it- this is the first time that someone says Sir Knight
Mhm.
or are you a knight? And what does he not do? He does not correct them.
He also doesn't fairly compensate or really even care about Barry Keegan's character situation. Like, I felt like there was a thing too of like, he's part of a royal family, he's sort of in a high castle above everybody else, and then he's put in this situation where he could be very empathetic and helpful to someone who's literally helping him, and he doesn't, and that's why he gets
Well,
punished, I felt like.
exactly, because in each of these chapters, I feel like each of these, the way I interpret is his mom has set up each test, and each test is testing a knightly virtue,
Yes, yeah.
and he fails the test. So, like this one is, I would think like this is charity.
Yeah, he should be
He
helping someone that clearly lost everything. And instead, he sort of takes advantage of him and gives him very little.
exactly, and then he gets what's coming to him as a
Yeah, you
result.
can't really feel sorry for him. You're like, well, he's got a point.
He's got a point. So I feel like with the Barry Keoghan character, that was the first time you see him not deny that he's a knight.
Mhm.
And then it shows a lack of charity, which is one of the knightly virtues. And then when you get a meeting with St. Winifred, uh, once again, she says a knight should know
Chastity, I
better.
guess? you think, with her?
I said this was chivalry
Chivalry, okay. Oh,
because
wait, I'm
she
skipping ahead. You're right.
you're chipping
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
chivalry, yeah,
yeah,
I'm thinking of the other
yeah,
lady, yeah.
yes. Because this one, once again, he doesn't deny it not being a knight because she says a knight should know better, and he doesn't correct her and say that he's not a knight.
Mhm.
Once again, he just lets everyone assume he's a knight. And then when she asks him to jump into the spring to find her head, what does he do? He
Yeah.
asks for payment. No, a
Oh,
knight would
that killed me when he did that. I was like, "No, come on."
no.
So
And
selfish.
exactly, a true knight would just see a lady in need and would just help. Like
Right.
that's just you just did it because it's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, that's like part of your branding.
Yeah. So when he actually does get her head and returns it to her, I feel like he kind of does get rewarded because the fox
Yeah,
shows up again and the
he
axe gets returned to him.
right, so he, like it took him a while to get there, but he eventually did the right thing, and it was just cool visually, like the ghost stuff and the skeleton, and I don't know, it was really fun.
I notice when he puts the head into the pillow of the dead body, like it suddenly becomes daylight and the light shining in. It's very like oh, like you can almost
Yeah.
imagine like the angels singing, and when it's like okay, you did good, kid. You did good. Like I felt like that's what that moment kind of represented. Like at
Mhm.
least that's how I've interpreted
No,
it.
I agree. I think you're touched by the fact that he does the right thing in that situation. Even if it
Hmm.
took him a while to get there, it seems like he's growing as a character.
Now this next section called an interlude is where my brain goes. I'm still trying to figure this one out.
I agree.
Because you know this is the giants and the cool like 180-degree like
The
camera
Giants
tilt
look so
twirl.
cool. I'm
It
they're
looks
they look so crazy. I've never seen anything like that. I love how they look.
and I'm still like I sometimes wonder, and I'm really curious about you. What's your interpretation of this? Because this is like the weirdest psychedelic portion of the film, and I'm still trying to figure out what I think it means.
I don't know. I kept trying to like look at pictures of the Giants. Like, did they look like people in his life? Like, yeah, I'm not really sure how to interpret that part.
Yeah, the closest I've come is like I feel like it's supposed to be teaching him about his insignificance.
Mm,
Like you're like, what are you compared to that? But I don't know if there's enough quote proof in the film to back up that interpretation, which is why this entire section is just weird.
yeah, it's very weird.
But yet, when he gets to the manor house at the end of the section, I think it's really interesting that when he's laying in that weird green bed, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
and you see that
Green Knight,
vision
Green
of his
Bed. Okay.
green bed. Right? There's a lot of green, especially when we get to this point, which is interesting because actually in the original poem, spoiler alert, the Lord is the Green Knight.
I was gonna ask that because I felt like, well, I went and looked, and no, it's the guy from that movie, The Witch.
Yes. Yeah.
But and I love his performance as the Green Knight, but there were times I was like, is the Green Knight actually Arthur? Is he actually, the Lord? Like, does he represent someone else or him somehow in the future? Like I wondered who he was supposed to be, but
Yeah. In the poem, it is the Lord
okay,
because in the poem, the lady is Morgan Le Fay.
interesting. Okay,
Yeah, which got really weird when you saw this movie.
yeah, that
And
would be less appropriate.
yeah. Well, is it even more appropriate? Because think about who, I mean, wow. Wow. This section called an exchange of winnings. I got a little
Yeah.
uncomfortable, Lisa. Not gonna
Yeah,
lie.
it's, intense, and that's the one that I was talking about where I felt like maybe chastity was supposed to be his lesson here.
Chastity
Um,
or fidelity,
yeah, because he's not faithful to his girlfriend. In fact, he can't wait to dump her, and well, we'll talk about that later, but, like, if given a better opportunity, I feel like in the beginning, him with her was sort of like she was at his level, and he was at the lowest point in his life. And in this part, it's almost like if he could get even just a little bit above, he's going to shoot for that instead. and not
Exactly.
really thank and appreciate the people that care about him no matter what state he's in. Instead, he wants to be above his station.
Right, and the fact that the lady is played by Alicia Vikander,
Hmm.
his girlfriend is also played by Alicia Vikander,
Right.
but but as Isel, she's got some makeup prosthetics on her to make her like make her nose a little bit wider, make her cheeks a little bit, you know, it, she doesn't have like that porcelain statue look
Yeah,
to
that she
her.
typically does.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
but yeah, it's and she doesn't look regal and royal, which is what he's aiming for, right? Because he wants to be a knight.
He wants to be a knight, right? So I saw the lady as his vision of his lover if she was quote proper. Like
Yeah,
that's
if
why I
she was
wrote my
like good
notes.
enough, yeah.
Yeah, good. That's yeah, and
Because
once
he
again,
probably wouldn't be able to marry her if he becomes a knight. It's like I don't think they're probably supposed to marry, sex
yeah,
workers. And
I don't.
yeah. I mean, I don't know for
Yeah.
sure, but I doubt it, especially since they have all these virtues. And like also another part of it though is like he wants something he can't have. Like Essel he can have. I mean, there's no
Yes.
competition. But with this woman, it's like she's somebody else's wife. I mean, I think that even adds like a layer to it of like it's almost not about her. It's about him.
Mm-hmm. It's about him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His ego. Yeah.
And then also look at how the Lord and the Lady like stroke his ego. Like
Mhm.
start going once again. He does it for the third time. He does not correct someone when they call him a knight because he's not a knight yet. But yet he continues to accept this fantasy that he's a knight when he's
Mhm.
not. He doesn't deserve to be a knight. That's what his mom. I interpret that's what his mom's trying to teach him.
Yeah,
Like you have to
yeah.
earn this.
Right. And he's done literally nothing to earn it.
Yeah. So like I think it's interesting that the old lady, the lady's attendant, she wears a blindfold just like Mother did when she was casting the
Yeah.
Green Knight spell.
That was weird.
That was really weird.
Yeah, I was like, is she seeing him somehow? Yeah, we've wondered about what that meant too.
I almost wondered if she is because there's the scene where when Gawain wakes up in the house, you see his mother, and then it becomes the Lord, and
Hmm.
then you see the old lady. And I almost am wondering, is the Lord, the lady, and the old woman all avatars of Mother?
Mm.
Like
Okay, I could
Mother
see
in
that.
Mother in three different forms.
And
Um,
also, like, Alyssa Vikander gives him, because he loses that green belt, and then she gives him her green belt that she made in that
exactly,
scene
but it's the
too.
same. But it's the same belt.
Right.
Yeah. And when you listen to that dialogue, and she's like, "I made this." Well, his mother made that. So
Yeah.
it's because it got stolen by Barry Keoghan
Hmm.
back when he got his butt handed to
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
I also noticed that when the lady is sort of seducing him in the library and talking about wanting to paint his portrait, she she condescends on the bell gift that Isel gave him and even rips it off of him, and he doesn't fight it. So
Yeah,
it's
it all
like,
felt like a test. Like, would you really be true to the person you love and all that or not? And it's like I guess he wouldn't if he saw a better opportunity.
hmm um, did you pay a lot of attention to the what I'm calling like the red green monologue that the lady gives when they're like around the fire? They're
Oh yeah, no, I guess I didn't.
it's it's this weird discussion about red is life and lust and
Oh
alive,
yeah,
and
okay.
green is raw. I like they say green is the color of the earth, but it's also the color of rot,
Decay, yeah.
of decay. And she just talks about this whole cycle of you can live it up, you can have lust and love and all of this, but it will always get replaced by like the earth will swallow it back up.
Which is like sort of a metaphor for like the end of his journey. Yeah, the
Exactly.
Green Knight and his imminent death that he's sort of like avoiding this whole film.
It's just it's really interesting. And I also love the conversation the Lord has because the Lord asks him, "So you just do this one thing. You just go meet the Green Knight and suddenly you're an honorable man." And Gawain goes, "Yes." And it's and I think it points out how childish Gawain is, that he thinks this is all it takes for me to be an honorable man.
Yeah, yeah, it really exemplifies why he doesn't like deserve this yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, that leads to, by the way, it's called an exchange of winnings because in the poem, the whole idea is that the Lord tells him, whatever you get, you give to me. And actually, in the poem, whenever he comes back with the animal, the Gawain actually in the poem does stay true. All he does is give the woman a kiss. When the lady's in the poem, the lady's throwing herself at him like
Yeah, in this one she's
constantly.
sort of more, like you said, almost like taunting him in some ways.
Yeah, especially when we get to the belt scene,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which that that scene makes me so uncomfortable, but yet it's so important
Yeah,
because I feel like it's his mother shaming him. It's like
it does seem
you want
shamey.
it doesn't shame because like you want this belt so bad you ejaculate. Like
Yeah.
that's how badly you want something that's going to allow you to be safe. And then as soon as she leaves, the old woman with the blindfold shows up. And it's like, that's his mother, like, look at you. Like,
Yeah,
sitting
you're no
there.
knight. Yeah.
Yes. And I feel like that is like this monumental moment. Because even the lady says you are, when she looks at the I'm
The
trying to figure out how
stuff.
the stuff. Yes. Um, trying to be polite when it comes to this, but
It's
when she
graphic
goes,
in the movie, yeah.
it is very graphic in the movie. But she even says, "You're no knight," and it's
Yeah,
like,
which
ooh,
it like wouldn't really fit in a lot of other movies, but because you know the time period that it's kind of set in, and that, like I said, chastity seems to be like one of the important virtues, you're like, oh, okay, that's why this is happening.
yeah. And it's just like, wow, you really gave in. Like
Yeah.
you gave in. I mean, it's Alicia Vikander in like a bearskin robe, like
Yeah.
I mean, it is built to be the ultimate
Like test,
temptation.
yeah.
Yes, and it works.
And it's also
And like,
weird because he's not really doing anything. That also feels very childish somehow, or
yes,
immature, like, because they're not actually like, having sex, so that makes it even like more pathetic and weird.
yes,
Like,
thank you.
it's like, I
Yes,
don't
I
know why, but
completely
it's
agree
just
with.
even more like, ugh. um
Ooh,
so I think, yeah, that's a really good part to show, just that he's desperate. He's kind of desperate.
yes, very desperate. Um, we. It's interesting. I feel like the next chapter title really leads me into one of my big questions I'm going to have at the end of this movie,
Okay.
and I've heard different interpretations, and I'm really going to be. I'm really excited to discuss it with you.
Okay.
Like, I want to know what you think, Lisa. But when we get to the section called a beheading at the Green Chapel, when he
Mm.
sees the boat and the fox is like, listen, I feel like the fox, this is where I really started to think the fox was his mother.
Yeah.
Because the fox is like, go home, you can live with the shame.
Yeah, she's kind
Like,
of like, you this didn't work out. Just go home.
you have effed up so
I
badly this entire time.
I think in a lot of ways, even if it's not his mom and maybe it's just a familiar, but it's like, this isn't going well, and it wasn't really the vision that the mom had for him. So I think that's
It's
our
like,
first clue here, like, hey, this has gone awry.
exactly. And he's still wearing the belt, which so we've talked about a lack of charity, a lack of chivalry, a lack of fidelity or chastity. And I felt like the belt ultimately says it's a lack of courage.
Mm,
You are a coward.
yeah.
Like, you know what the rules of this game are, and you're wearing this belt that you've been promised is going to protect you from any and all harm. And the fox calls him out on it. And
Yeah.
I love that, because then he goes to the Green Chapel and he waits there for the night to wake up on Christmas Day. Because once again, this is a Christmas movie, folks.
Yeah.
It's 'tis the season. And just like in the poem, when the knight goes to cut off his head, because that's what Gawain did to him, he flinches. And that actually does happen in the poem.
Okay.
Uh, but what's different is that then, and he's already taken the belt off in the poem by this point. Like
Okay.
that's like that's not an issue. And then in the poem, the knight gives him a nick on the cheek as basically a, now you've learned your lesson. Now, basically you'll have this scar just to remind you, you flinched. Bad on you.
Mm.
And but because this movie's telling a different story, I think it's interesting that like he's still wearing the belt.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get this, what you think is going to be the ending of the movie, and what you learn is like this alternate timeline vision of how absolutely crappy his life is going to turn out if he keeps going on this path.
Yeah, I kind of interpret it as, so yeah, he imagines like, that he becomes king and everything, but he's mean to Essel. He takes the kid away from her, and raises it apart from her, marries somebody else. And anyway, ultimately everyone ends up hating him, and then they want to kill him, and that's how it ends. And I kind of interpreted that as he knows he's like a shitty person, and that if he doesn't take off that sash, if he doesn't just meet um his fate now, it's just he's gonna keep screwing up. That's kind of how I viewed it.
Well, I'll tell you, that's exactly what David Lowery says it is.
Okay. It's like he didn't grow enough, okay? He failed, and he's gonna continue to fail. And so like one way to change his behavior is this moment, which may lead to his death, but it would still be better than him being like a bad person for the rest of his life.
Right. This grants him a sense of self-awareness. And so when the vision's over, because he even pulls the sash off in the dream and then his head falls off,
Yes.
you know, which I think is great because it's like that's him realizing, oh, that's the point.
Yeah.
It's like it finally clicked. It took all of this for it to click. And so he stops the night again, less panicky, so that he can take the belt off, and then he says, I'm ready. And I truly believe that he's willing to take his medicine, as it were.
Yeah, I think he's ready to die because he's kind of like, I'm realizing now that all these like bad decisions I make, they lead to real consequences. I
Hmm.
think maybe before his journey he didn't see how his behavior impacted his life, but now he does, and so he's like, I'm going to continue to make all these bad decisions. So what's the difference? Do I live a really long time making bad decisions, or do I do the right thing now?
Yeah, because in the dark future vision, I noticed he's wearing the belt the entire time. Like even
Yeah.
when he has
Well, yeah,
sex on
smart,
his
right? Because he knows what his fate should have been.
right, exactly, and it's just there constantly, and they make a point of showing that he's wearing it, and so that's when he finally takes it off. You're like, this is kind of the hero's journey part where it's like you finally became the hero. Finally, it
Hmm.
just took you literally to the very end to
Yeah.
get there, and and then the knight kneels down and like draws his finger across his throat and goes, "Off with your head, Sir Knight." And then the movie ends, which was very abrupt to me the first time I watched it. Um, but I have a different interpretation now that I've seen it a couple more
Okay.
times. What did I want to hear what you think?
I think it could go either way. I feel like him just accepting his death would have been enough to pass the test, or maybe he does get beheaded.
Yeah, I know. I had a coworker who told me in an interview he heard that Lowry said he does get beheaded,
Mm.
but I've never seen that interview,
Yeah, I haven't
so
seen that.
I haven't seen that. And honestly, I would hate for Lowry to actually come out and say that because it's like
Yeah, agreed.
I like if you're going to give me an ambiguous ending,
Then just stick with it. Yeah.
stick with ambiguous ending, uh, because the way that the knight smiles and like draws his finger across his throat and says, "Off with your head," it's like he's being playful with him,
Yeah.
almost like the way in the original poem the knight does just like give him like a paper cut across his cheek with his axe as a learn your lesson, son.
I think it would have been
And
less impactful or less satisfying if he did that in the movie, and it is better to hard cut away.
yeah, and then he even calls him a knight, so it's
Mhm.
almost like you have now earned being a knight. Like the Green Knight has said, "Sir Knight," and so I feel like his journey has been to become a knight in this movie, and the Green Knight himself calls him a knight at the end. But I don't know. I mean, honestly, it could go either way, and I'd be perfectly happy with it going either way. I love it how I've just had two different ideas. You know, this is one of those movies you can watch the ending multiple times and feel
Mhm.
differently each time you watch it.
Yeah, I was convinced before I saw this movie that it was gonna end with him being the Green Knight somehow. Just not having read the poem or anything, I thought, "Oh, that would be like, then he's gonna have to test someone else or something," but, yeah, like, the way it ended, yeah, and I kind of think he let him live, but at the same time, it's better for us not to know.
Hmm. Or just to interpret as we
Yeah,
as
as
we
we
see
see fit.
fit as the
Yeah, yeah,
audience.
yeah.
Did you know there's an end credit scene?
No. How did I
Yeah.
miss that?
If you watch all the way to the end of the credits, there is a end credit scene of a little girl, probably about 6 or 7, crawling around, and the crown, the king's crown, is there on the floor, and she just kind of picks it up and puts it on her head, and that's the end of the movie.
Okay, how do you interpret that?
Okay, I interpret that. If I go with the interpretation that uh, Gawain lived and then he went home and he had a daughter
Right, because he has a
with
daughter in the vision, yeah.
but he has a son with Esau.
Oh, that's
He has a
true. Mhm.
he has a daughter with the woman who also plays Winifred.
Mhm.
I was almost like his future has
Oh,
been
yeah, that girl
changed.
from, isn't she in that Marvel show? Yeah, yeah.
Uh, so that's how I interpret that. But once again, like I don't know. I just feel like that because it's a girl and not the boy. It's like,
Hmm.
well, did he go home? Did he learn his lesson? And so even the kid he had was different. And she's putting the crown on, and the crown's laying around. So you know, is does that you know does that mean that the future is now changed? I don't know. I think it's also interesting for a movie like this to have an end credit scene. Like these are not the
Yeah, that
kind of
is
movies that have end
interesting.
credit. Yeah, these are not the kind of movies that have end credit scenes, and I like that this one makes me like it adds interpretation. Like A24 has a great shop, and A24 does a lot of product. I really hope they release a screenplay to this movie because I will
Ooh,
buy it in a New York minute, so that I can like read what Lowry actually wrote in the script.
yes. And I have to say really fast, Erin Kellyman, the who plays Winifred, is the girl from, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Star Wars. So I just had to
Okay,
I
okay.
was like, "Okay, she looks really familiar outside the movie," and I was like, "Oh, yeah, maybe I knew that when I was watching it, but I forgot."
Well, I have really dug into this movie. This movie really helped me kind of start a deep dive into other A24 movies.
Oh, I
Like
love
this
A24 so much.
I have fallen down the rabbit hole, Lisa. I have
It's
fallen down
like
the rabbit hole.
whatever they make, I'm like, "Yep, I'll see it."
Yeah. I've learned I'm more like if they do, especially if they do science, all their science fiction movies
Yes,
are fabulous.
they
And I
really
want them
are.
to do more fantasy movies after me seeing
Well, especially
this.
because we've got so much science fiction at this point, it's kinda it would be a little refreshing.
Yeah. But Ex Machina, High Life, Under the Skin, like all these movies have been like, oh, I'm down.
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
down for
yeah.
this. But I have really loved this. I pre-ordered it. I'm getting the soundtrack to Green Knight on vinyl,
Oh, nice.
and yeah, and I went really deep. Uh, they only offered like 400 of them, and I grabbed one. They sold reproductions of Gawain's sword,
Interesting,
and
wow. Yeah, you really have fallen down the rabbit hole.
I'm a huge King Arthur buff. My senior thesis in high school I had to write a 3,500 to 4,000 word essay to graduate, and my essay was on Arthur, on the
Nice.
Arthurian legend. So this movie was like in my wheelhouse to start with, and it exceeded my expectations. So like I am so into this. So I feel like, once again, when I talk about checking boxes, not only do I check a Christmas movie box, I check a fantasy movie box that's also an Arthur movie technically. And then, it's just, this movie was made for me, and the way that film Twitter and my film friends have embraced this movie as much as I have, and how many top 10 lists I'm
Yes.
seeing
Oh, for
of
sure.
2021 have this on it,
Yeah, it's
even
very
indie.
gratifying, I'm sure. It's like
Very
it's like,
gratifying.
"I
I was
was
like,
onto something with this one."
I was there from day one and I got
Yeah,
it. Because
I think we saw this in theaters, like, when it came out, so
so I was so excited, and then, there's special features on the Blu-ray 4K disc, but there's also different special features that are exclusive to the iTunes Apple version you can buy, and I just am ready to start watching all of them.
nice, nice. I love it when that happens, when you find, like, a new thing that's that satisfying.
And it goes with this whole idea of, I love that movie, that it's like I want to dig deep. It's like I
Yes.
want to I want to breathe this movie in. And I am so glad that I had the opportunity to come back and talk about it with you, because
Oh, for sure,
this is a
anytime.
this is a movie that demands that you talk to somebody
I
about it.
agree. I know I've thought of people in my life that I want them to see it just so we can talk about it. So, completely agree. That brings me to my last couple questions. Why did you fall in so deep? I think you already kind of explained it, but if you had to sum it up in a sentence, like, why are you down this rabbit hole?
Because on a technical level, it is it achieves a level of perfection in film for me. Like,
Yeah,
when I talked about costume, music, cinematography, writing, it's like it's all there.
yeah, acting,
Uh,
everything.
everything is there, and it communicates so much visually that it forces interpretation from the audience. Like,
Mhm.
you are going to have questions that is going to make you want to rewatch this movie. And like I said, I saw it on a Friday night. I think I went back and saw it on a Monday. It's like I couldn't get back to the theater fast enough to watch the movie again, because it made me have questions that I knew that if I watched the movie again, I would make more answers for myself. And I love movies that do that.
Yeah, 100% agree. And how do you pitch this to someone that's thinking about watching The Green Knight?
Um, if you love fantasy, indie filmmaking on a budget, like this, but this movie doesn't. It feels indie, but it doesn't look indie. But it's an A24 movie that's a sword and sorcery movie that's going to make you think.
Yeah.
There's my elevator pitch.
Yeah, I think it's everything you said. Like if you love really good drama and you want to see sort of like a modern take on fantasy too, those are the only other two things I would add. But yeah, everything you said. um, so Scott, thank you so much again for making time to be on the show. I really, really appreciate you coming on. Where can people find you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at ScottDC27. You can find my podcast, the DC Squadcast, wherever podcasts can be found. I mean, if you're listening to this show, probably the exact same player. Just type in DC Squadcast. You'll find us. We're on Vero, Facebook, YouTube, and you can find the entire network of shows at squadcastmedia.com. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/squadcastmedia. We are a fan-supported network, and we have over 400 pieces of exclusive content over on our Patreon. The latest piece that you can get is my co-host Tim and I discuss Ridley Scott's 1979 classic Alien, and we are going to
Nice.
launch into a complete journey through the Alien
Oh
franchise,
wow.
only on Patreon.
Great, great. Well, that's awesome. Again, thank you so much for coming on and hope to have you back soon.
I would love to.